Hi. Okay, it's 11 o'clock, and we're recording. So today's our short class, and I am still saving the file from the European Union policymaking class, so it's quite big. So it's I'm trying to make sure I don't accidentally close that file before it's done saving to my computer, so I can post that on Cyber Campus. But speaking of Cyber Campus, okay, so let's go to Cyber Campus and to US foreign policy. And I always want to let you watch what I'm doing. So let me share the screen. And so here we see there is the Cyber Campus. And let's go to the attendance. Hooray, attendance. And
I love that guy, man. I love him.
There's so enthusiasm in the
okay, and then we go to smart attendance. And the number is 424 is your lucky number, 424. And so let me go back to the main screen, 424, so I can put that in the chat function. 424 is the number for everyone to have. And then let me also orient myself to the lesson plan, and that's the other class. So let me close that. And all right, so your U.S. foreign policy, and there's so much going on in the world regarding U.S. foreign policy, and let me open up the files that I want to work with today. Let me remind myself what is on Cyber Campus exercises, because I want to make sure that we have enough opportunities to participate in the class. And so let me see here. All right, so okay, so let me open up this exercise. So I have a question for you. Please respond to the following statement. The U.S. defeat in Afghanistan means the U.S. is more likely to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. So, defeat, humiliation. The mighty United States has been defeated by the Taliban. Does that mean that the United States is more likely to recognize Taiwan as a separate sovereign country, no longer one nation, two countries, but two different countries? That there is the People's Republic of China, and then there will be the Republic of Taiwan as a separate state and nation. Even though you might call them German, like the way, even you might call them Chinese, the way we call, Austrian Germans, Austrians or Austrian Germans, we might call them Taiwanese Chinese. But the U.S. defeat in Afghanistan means the U.S. is more likely to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. And so let me assign you to exercise breakout rooms. Oh, we have a chat. So I already sent out the attendance number 424. So let me go to the breakout rooms. And so let's see if we have 3 groups, it'll be 10. Let's make it 4 groups. And 1, 2, 3, 4. And just to do what I like to do, let's assign I'm going to do with my little 101 coin here. Well, I guess I have to do it with the 51 coin. So if it's tails, number is tails. So it's the person at the top. If it's tails, the person at the top of the list of the group is going to speak first. If it's heads, the person at the bottom will speak first. And it is heads. So the last listed member of the group will speak first for the group. So let me create the group, and there you see the groups. So Chong Hyung Kyung will speak first. Nikita Skripnik will speak first for group 2. Ru Xing Xing will speak first for group 3, and Timen will speak first for group 4. On that question, make sure I can share that screen. On this question, do you think that the U.S. defeat and humiliation in Afghanistan means that the U.S. is more likely to compensate and respond by declaring Taiwan America's close ally. With so many family connections, so many Taiwanese people have American connections, like South Koreans have American family ties, and it's so integrated in the American economy that the U.S. is more likely to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. So open all rooms. Let me go back to the share screen here and share screen. Open all rooms, and okay. So please join the group. Please join the groups and come up with in the minutes remaining with some kind of a position to take. And I see we have a chat here. What's the chat? Okay. All right. So yes. So and I will write a statement as well, since I always ask you. So you can see me. There's the point. You can see me working here in my office. See, I'm writing now my statement. So communicate with each other, talk, and come up with a statement for your group leader to speak, to report to the rest of us. Okay. All right. And I should tell you, I have an interest in this also because I wrote a paper on this topic that I presented at the World Congress of the Korean Political Science Association, which met a few weeks ago in middle of August, all online. And so I'll give you one more minute. Of course, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I want us to think about these topics, however, and in order to introduce some theoretical frameworks that are going to shape how we study American foreign policy today with its ties and roots and foundations in the Cold War that ended 30 years ago, but it's still overwhelmingly important for understanding what we see happening today. So And it relates to this question too about Taiwan, of course, because Taiwan was protected by the US Navy at the end of the Chinese Civil War to keep the Chinese communists from conquering it, because the Americans believed that the communists of China were part of a worldwide communist campaign to conquer the world, ultimately directed from Moscow. And so the Americans engaged in containment by protecting Taiwan when Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang fled to Taiwan after losing on the mainland. And for the same reasons the Americans fought the Korean War and the Vietnam War. In other words, to stop what they believed was Soviet communist, imperialist, communist expansionism. So, okay, so who's going to speak first? And heads, it's group 1 or 2, and it's heads. Group 1 is heads, and it's heads. So, Chon Hyo Kyung, what did you group decide in terms of where they fit on this scale?
Okay, good morning, sir. Actually, we were a lack of background knowledge, so we were talking about but we were thinking just like US left Afghanistan because of the military equipment.
Yeah.
So we think they don't want to make a conflict with the China. So
okay. Yeah, I think they want to avoid conflict with China too. But in my point, in my paper, what I wrote, I agree that the US will likely recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. It will likely do so, however, after more European countries recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state first. Did you know that Lithuania, little tiny Lithuania, has in effect recognized Taiwan? They didn't formally declare, we formally recognize the existence of the Republic of Taiwan. They let Taiwan open up a representation in Vilnius, the capital of Little Lithuania, one of the 27 member states of the European Union, under the name Taiwan, not Taipei, Taiwan. And the Beijing government is furious. They're calling Taiwan a crazy little country because Lithuania is recognizing that there is an actor, a state actor, silently recognizing that there is a state actor in the international community called Taiwan that has, in effect, an embassy in Vilnius. Because the standard operating practice had been to allow that entity of Taiwan to open up a representation in your country, in Vilnius, capital of Lithuania, or even United States, but you had to call it Taipei, the capital city. They are the first country to allow Taiwan to call its embassy as the representation of Taiwan. And Lithuania is a small country, but Lithuania is in NATO. Lithuania is a former Soviet republic that was occupied by the Soviet Union. And so it tends to see more of a threat among Lithuanian nationalists from Russia. They think that Russia wants to rebuild, well, someday wants to rebuild its Soviet empire in a new form, not the Soviet Union, but that Russia is a threat to Lithuania because it was part of the Soviet Union, and prior to that, part of the Russian Empire, except for that time, 1918 to 1940, when they were independent. So it's in the European Union, it's in NATO, and it's also in the Eurozone. Lithuania was the last country to join the Eurozone. So my point is this: I don't think Lithuania would have done what it did unless it was in consultation with the United States and other actors. So the Americans, yes, Remember, China has nuclear weapons, America has nuclear weapons, Russia has nuclear weapons, North Korea has nuclear weapons. These countries are all highly nationalistic. Accidents can happen. So the Americans are going to, and this is the nature of conflict during the Cold War, after nuclear weapons were invented, that now we see countries compete more indirectly, intensely, but indirectly, so that they can avoid direct confrontation with another country that could escalate because of emotion and confusion through accident or otherwise to a direct conflict in a world in which now we have nuclear weapons. So the Americans are more cautious. So Lithuania has its interests. Lithuania has its needs. It wants support in dealing with Russia and Belarus, which is an ally. Belarus under Lukashenko is an ally of close ally of Russia. Belarus is sending immigrants, refugees from Afghanistan and Iraq that are trying to get into Europe through Belarus and trying to push them across the border into Lithuania and Poland. And Lithuania wants American support from Russia, the former imperial occupier of Lithuania. And so this highlights how international relations and conflict and American foreign policy is affected by nuclear weapons. It's not just America, it's all countries. This is how countries fight war in the nuclear era. They fight war indirectly through interfering or involvement in the politics of each other in a way that is not directly obvious and that allows the country to publicly claim that they're not responsible. They're not engaged in this. And you see this in many different ways, in cyber warfare, covert cyber warfare, that Russian or Chinese or North Korean or Iranian intelligence officers are engaging in, or not. They're paying somebody in the private sector in Russia to hack American companies or American government agencies. But they can say, oh, we didn't do it. We didn't do it. Even when the Americans claim that they're still responsible for it. It highlights this indirect form, and you saw this during the Cold War in this class about American foreign policy. This pattern describes how we saw the United States and the Soviet Union engage in the Cold War. They fought their battles indirectly through competitive interference, competitively interfering in the internal politics of all the other countries of the world, through the CIA and the KGB. And they did it everywhere. Right? In Italy, in African countries, in Latin American countries, they would fight their conflicts covertly and indirectly, allying with different groups inside of a country who want help from Washington, they're in conflict with some other actor inside the country, some other group, an ethnic group, a political opponent, and that other political opponent, seeing their enemy ally with Washington, will go to the enemy of Washington to ask them, Russia, for help against their local enemy, because they can say, look, Soviet Union, see Moscow? That country, my enemy inside my country is getting help from Washington, so you better help me. Because if my enemy wins, then my country will become an ally of America against you. You see it happening today in Myanmar, right? How the Americans and the Chinese are competing for influence in Myanmar by allying with different groups within the country. So, for example, the Chinese are more closely affiliated with the Burmese military than the American is. And so they dominate Myanmar more so than the United States. But this is how we fight wars in the nuclear era. And I think, Americans can still be humiliated by being defeated, because at some point, also the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War would involve themselves directly against the perceived ally of their superpower enemy. So the Americans believed that Kim Il-sung and North Korea were agents of Stalin. And Kim Il-sung was going to destroy America's ally, Ri Syngman, and the regime in South Korea. So the Americans intervened to stop Kim Il-sung and North Korea from destroying America's ally in South Korea. Not because the Americans were so concerned about the human rights of Koreans, but because they thought that Kim Il-sung and North Korea were agents of Stalin in Moscow. They intervened in South Vietnam because they believed that North Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh in Hanoi were agents of Moscow, going to destroy America's ally, the South Korean government. And you see those kinds of indirect forms, but they were careful to try to avoid direct conflicts directly between the Soviet Union and the United States. And still, dangerous episodes occurred, like the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the Americans were preparing to destroy the Cuban regime, and the Soviet Union sought to protect the Cuban regime by sending missiles there. And the Americans threatened war with the Soviet military in Cuba unless those missiles were taken out. And that almost, you don't really know. Most people don't realize how close we came to war in that situation. If John F. Kennedy had not been president of the United States, I don't think we would be here right now. You and me would not be speaking right now. But that's the topic for a later class. So let's go back to the other groups. And so let's see. Heads is room 2, and it's heads room 2. So Nikita, what did your group come up with?
Yes. So first of all, we were kind of leaning towards not disagreeing or agreeing, but I think we were more leaning to agreement because, for example, North and South Korea, they are sovereignties, but they dispute each other, right? Because they think of one unity. And one thing that we have seen is that China tried to help the Taliban because of fear of terrorism in China, from the Taliban. So they kind of helped. And I think because of that, the US would strongly, agree to see it as a sovereign state just for the political relations and being able, as you said before, having those relations and saying, oh, if this one attacks, then we will say, come help us, etc. So I think that's what we discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening this morning to American radio and the public service radio, and it's a nonprofit, NPR, National Public Radio. And the way they're portraying it is that the United States could potentially collaborate with the Taliban because the Taliban, they keep claiming, are the quote unquote sworn enemy of the Islamic State. And the Islamic State appears to represent a group, my understanding, not according to the news reports, my understanding is that the Islamic State represents a nationalist movement that wants to unify all Muslims across the world, from Morocco to the Philippines, in a sovereign pan-Muslim caliphate, Islamic State. And the Taliban don't want to do that. The Taliban appear to be religious Afghan nationalists. Their identity is more focused on the territorial community of Afghanistan. So they could collaborate and fight, but when the Taliban start collaborating, for example, from the perspective of the Islamic State actors, because this is a topic about nationalism, and I'm really into nationalism, right? From the perspective of a pan-Muslim nationalist like Osama bin Laden, the late Osama bin Laden, the need to fight and defeat Israel and the Americans in Palestine, for example, they think is vital and essential for the well-being of all Muslims and is necessary to be a good Muslim. And the Taliban, they don't appear to be that interested in fighting the Americans everywhere and to defeat Israel on behalf of the Palestinians to liberate the Muslims of Palestine. they don't appear to have a dominant identity orientation in that regard. So, you know, if you're going to fight the Americans, you're going to pay a price. Now, the Taliban paid that price and they won, but they had to made some kind of deal with the Americans that they both have a quote unquote sworn enemy in the form of the Islamic State, because the Islamic State thinks the Taliban is too cooperative with America's friends, like in Pakistan, the Pakistan government. And this is, you know, and this, and this is one common adversary that the Americans share with the Chinese and the Russians and the Israelis and the Europeans is, and Narendra Modi in India is pan-Islamism. If you're a pan-Islamist, you look around the world, you see Muslims being abused everywhere, in India, in Israel, Palestine, in Afghanistan, in Myanmar, by the Rohingya being abused by the Buddhist nationalists there. They're being humiliated and America intervening to support indirectly through the CIA, the House of Saud, the ruling Saudi royal family, that corrupt royal family in Saudi Arabia, or the ruling families in the sheikdoms of the Persian Gulf, the oil sheikdoms in Kuwait and United Arab Emirates. And so, but the Taliban, they're Muslims and they're intense Muslims, but they are more focused on Afghanistan. But if you're an Islamist, you see Muslims being abused in Xinjiang province, the Uyghurs being put in concentration camps to be forced to be assimilated, and terrible things happening in these concentration camps. And it's your fellow brother Muslims. And we must fight for them and liberate them, as well as the Sovietized, Europeanized betrayers of Islam in those post-Soviet states in Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, states that the Soviet Union created. Stalin created those states. Those people didn't create those states. Stalin and Lenin created this thing called Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan. That's why they call it Khorasan. That's the old name for that region. When Genghis Khan conquered it, it was called Khorasan. So that shared enemy that the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians and the Hindu nationalists in India have might be one element of cooperation, but still, I mean, even the Americans, there's some talk about the Americans cooperating with the Taliban now because they all have a shared enemy. So I understand why you cannot, or neutral cannot decide. Good job. So
actually, I have another question. Why did America not consider this relationship with the Taliban 15 years ago when they bombarded everything and invaded Afghanistan? Like, because it doesn't make sense in my eyes why they didn't try earlier.
Well, I mean, the claim was Osama bin Laden somehow was involved in planning the September 11, 2001 attacks. I don't know if he was actually involved. He didn't actually, most of the organization for that was done in Germany by expatriate Saudis. The 19 hijackers who hijacked those planes, 15 came from America's allies, Saudi Arabia. 15 of the 19 were Saudis, and they weren't ignorant. They were educated middle-class boys who were furious about America supporting this corrupt. I mean, the level of corruption in Saudi Arabia and Jordan it's beyond comprehension. It's a medieval regime, right? It's like something out of Europe 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago. And then one was from Morocco, another American ally. One was from, I think, Egypt, another American ally. I think one was from Kuwait. They're all from American allied countries that were controlled by America's client friends in those countries. And they were furious about what the Americans were doing to control behind the scenes through their puppet minions, the House of Saud and the ruling royal family in Morocco and so on. And then, Osama bin Laden's role in that, he was an inspiration for pan-Islamists because he was from, he had a relationship with the Saudi royal family. He rejected the Saudi royal family, and he went and sacrificed the wealth and prosperity of his family, because his family was rich, to go live and fight in the mountains in Afghanistan. He was a charismatic symbol for the Islamists. And then he said he took credit for the September 11 attacks because he was very much aware that he was himself a living symbol of pan-Arabism and pan-Islamism in religious garb, in religious ideological universalism. I think the point is, I think the Americans are at war with pan-Arabism and pan-Islamism. That's the American, they're at war with pan-Arabism and pan-Islamism because pan-Arabism and pan-Islamism wants to redraw all of the Middle East, erase those borders that the British and the French and the Italians and the Portuguese and the Germans created in that region. And this threatens America's friends that it made during the Cold War, like the royal families of Saudi Arabia and the oil sheikdoms, and it threatens Israel. I mean, Israel cannot allow pan-Arabism, not to mention pan-Islamism, succeed because it threatens Israel. And those vested interests, this all became tied up with containment of the Soviet Union, that anybody who was opposed communism was good, even if they were corrupt, medieval, aristocratic, ruling families. And so that alliance with the House of Saud, that goes back to World War II, but then it was reinforced during the Cold War because the House of Saud hates communism. And it also doesn't care too much about Israel because they're a parochial, feudal family that wants to stay in power. They don't want to erase the borders and create one big pan-Arab Arabistan country. And they like to sell oil. So those three factors, but the most prominent one was for the Americans was that they were anti-communist and they also didn't care too much about Israel, even though they said a lot of anti-Israeli things. But then you saw how Donald Trump openly said, well, let's get rid of this. I want Israel to have formal relations with the United Arab Emirates and others. And the Saudis still can't do it because they have to deal with public opinion. They'd like to, but they can't open up formal diplomatic relations with Israel because of public opinion. Nationalist Arab and Muslim public opinion. So the Saudi royal family does other things to try to demonstrate to the Muslims and Arabs of the world. Remember, there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, right? That, yeah, we're Arab and Muslim nationalists too. So they were one of the only 3 countries that recognized the Taliban when they came to power in 1996, right? One was, they recognized, it was Saudi Arabia. Another one, I think, was United Arab Emirates, and I can't remember the third country. Because they wanted to demonstrate to the skeptical Arab world that, you know, yeah, we're defending Muslims, yeah. But the CIA is the most important American political actor in Saudi Arabia. Most significant communication between the Saudi royal family, the Saudi government, and the United States goes through the CIA, not through the ambassador, through the CIA. And that's the New York Times reporting that.
I just looked up, the third country was Pakistan.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, yeah, but again, the roots go back to the Cold War and containment and the 40 years of Cold War that built up all of these vested interests. And then on the basis of the belief that the Americans saved the world from the Russian version of Nazi Germany. And so America's influence and role in the world and leadership is good, because we saved the world from totalitarianism, and NATO should expand from Europe into Afghanistan and Iraq, and now the Americans are defeated in Afghanistan, and people are wondering, but if we're so good, why couldn't our goodness win? Why did the Afghan government just go poof? The way the communist regimes in Eastern Europe went poof when they realized that the Soviet army was not going to protect them anymore.
So was it a real defeat, though?
In Afghanistan? Well,
Yeah.
We'll see. Well, I mean, sure, the Americans would, if they had their choice, they would like to have kept their allies in power, but we'll see. I mean, there'll be a big test now because, as we're talking about in the European Union class, you know, there's talking about hundreds of thousands of refugees leaving Afghanistan. They're going to try to go to Europe. They're going to try to go to Belgium, Germany.
Yes.
And so if the Afghan economy collapses, and the Americans in the past, they put sanctions on Afghanistan when the Taliban came to power in 1996 and ended the civil war in Afghanistan. I mean, I remember this. I was in Bulgaria teaching at the American University in Bulgaria when this happened. And the Taliban swept out of Pakistan and they conquered the country and they ended the civil war there for the most part, except they didn't conquer the north. So and then the Americans put sanctions on them. And they couldn't do business and trade. So, of course, they engaged in illegal trade, opium, heroin, drugs. And they will do that again if they're not able to integrate into the world economy. So the Americans face a choice. And if they don't allow the Afghan economy to recover by freezing Afghanistan's foreign currency reserves in European and the American banks, then it's the Europeans that are going to have another wave of migration like they had in 2015 that fueled Brexit in 2016. So we'll see. I mean, there's lots of talk about humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, but I have to wonder, the Americans are so phobic about anybody that claims to be a Muslim politician, an Islamist, anybody who claims to be an Islamist, that they shut down. They haven't talked to them and negotiated with them until now. I don't know if they're going to start now. Maybe the perceived threat from the Islamic State might encourage them to work with the Taliban. But will the Europeans pressure the Americans? Say, you got to let this economy recover in Afghanistan. You have to let them have their money. You have to engage in trade with them. Because if you don't, we're going to have another wave of refugees, and Marine Le Pen might get elected in France next year as a result.
In Europe, we're having like a lot of countries that are becoming very right-minded because of these waves of immigration. Yeah,
and they're going to happen again if Afghanistan's economy collapses completely, and it's disintegrating right now. I mean, inflation is spiraling upward, and but I mean, when I see what the Americans have done in Yemen in terms of sanctions, what they've done in other countries, I'm not too optimistic. But on the other hand, you know, and the Taliban tried to show, right, we want to work with the world. We're different from what we were 20 years ago. When they took control of Kabul, they executed one of the prisoners that they found there, who was the leader of the Islamic State in Afghanistan. He was in prison. They did not free him. They killed him. Clearly to send a message to America and the rest of the world that we don't want to, we're not pan-Islamists. We're not trying to overthrow the post-World War I boundaries drawn by the British and the French and the Italians we're just concerned about Afghanistan. So it's a critical time. So let me go to the next group, and so it's heads. It's Anais, and it's heads. Anais, what did your group come up with? What did you come up with, Anais?
Oh, well, I don't know a lot about this topic, but we chose to disagree because we think that even if secretly hidden way they will connect Afghanistan to Taiwan, we think that publicly they will treat each case differently. So yeah, we disagree.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is, you know, that we're talking about nationalism here. When I talk about humiliation, that's about identity. And, you know, this has been a challenge. We all know, or people will say, nationalism is the most powerful force for change in international relations. Vietnamese nationalism defeated the United States in Vietnam, right? The American technological advantage didn't work in Vietnam the way it worked in Korea. I mean, Vietnam is part of the Asian main landmass. It's not a peninsula like Korea. Right? There's no better place to defeat the American technological advantage in a place like Vietnam. Mountainous territory covered with tropical forest on the Asian mainland, right? America was defeated in Afghanistan. So when we talk about nationalism, people say it's the most powerful force But how do you measure that? How do you conceptualize that? How do you understand that? That's why so many people are drawn to Marxist or business theories or economic theories of politics, because you can count this. I can count this. How do you count nationalism? Even though we know it's so powerful. And that's a big challenge, but that's what we're talking about here. And international relations theorists have attempted to develop that. The founder of international relations theory of realism that you'll read about in the book, Hans Morgenthau, tried to describe nationalism. And I've worked with others later that tried to develop that further. And that's my theoretical framework that I'm trying to bring in here. You know, I wanted to highlight in the 10 minutes remaining how this was addressed from the point of view of Hans Morgenthau. And Hans Morgenthau was one of the founders of international relations theory after World War II. Hans Morgenthau was a, let me see if I can go back to share screen. Hans Morgenthau was a German Jew who fled to the United States after the Nazis came to power. And he lost a lot of his family members, were killed by the Germans, by the Nazis. And he built his career in the United States. And he developed the theory of realism. And he said, you know, that countries show behavior patterns that are deep behavior patterns that are not necessarily the real, are not necessarily motivated by what the leaders of those countries say is the motivation. We talked about nationalistic universalism, right, at the last class. That's Hans Morgenthau's idea, right? Hans Morgenthau. He said states act as if the desire for power and influence is control over the minds and actions of other people, is itself the primary motivation for state behavior, despite what the presidents and prime ministers and kings and emperors say it is in effect, they act as if the drive for power and influence itself is what they want to optimize in the world as actors, as state actors. Remember, Morgenthau, like you, a number of you students, was a European, was a continental European. So Hans Morgenthau was heavily influenced by the ideas of Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud talked about subconscious, right? That people themselves lie to each other and lie to themselves about what is making them do what they want to do. They don't know. They don't understand themselves what's making them do what they want to do. They know what they have to say, what they want is in terms of what's appropriate and proper in society, but people are driven by forces and motivations that they themselves do not clearly themselves understand. That's one of the sources of insights of Sigmund Freud. Right? And Morgenthau, like to this day, so many European theorists and philosophers are so influenced by Freudian theory, right? But it's been developed by others, of course, right? But there are things going on inside countries that the leaders of countries themselves do not fully understand. And he talked about how states act as if extending and institutionalizing their relative political influence in the world is their primary motivation. And so he came up with that states show three different kinds of behavior. The states that dominate the current situation in the world, they're status quo powers. And so the best example of a status quo international relations actor was Britain in the 19th century, right? Then there are those actors that want to challenge the ruling superior power. Imperialist actors who want to overturn the established international order informally or formally that's emerged. And rising Germany was an example of an imperialist power. Or the Soviet Union was an example of an imperialist power. Could China be an imperialist power? With America being the status quo power. And then the third form of foreign policy, there's a status quo foreign policy, an imperialist foreign policy under Hitler, for example, and a prestige foreign policy, right? Where an actor is declining in relative capability, but they want to maintain their influence over people's brains, over people's minds and behavior. And so he said you could predict how countries would behave, right? So a country that has a number one power capability, but the influence it exercises in the world is secondary, what kind of foreign policy will it show? Imperialist, status quo, or prestige? Anyone? For among the three, this country, country A, has a power potential of 1. It's number 1 in power potential compared to the rest of the world, but its level of its influence over the rest of the world in the minds and behavior of people is secondary. What kind of foreign policy would it adopt from amongst these categories? Anyone?
Prestige?
No, imperialist.
Huh.
Because it wants to have influence over how you and I think about the world, but it's still dominated by the previous superpower. Here's an actor that's number 1 in power potential, number 1 in influence over the minds and actions of you and me and everybody else. What kind of foreign policy behavior pattern will it show? Status quo, imperialist, or prestige?
Status quo.
Yeah, status quo, because it's on top. So it will want to maintain the status quo. And it will condemn this actor as a dangerous threat to the world and to the peace and stability of humanity. And, oh, it's so terrible, bad imperialist power. And then there's this actor. This actor, its power capabilities have declined because of slow economic growth, because of overextension and wasted resources, but it still has a dominant influence over people's thinking. And so what kind of foreign policy pattern will it display from these 3 categories?
Prestige.
Yeah. So it's in decline, but it doesn't want people to think it's in decline. So the Americans have just been defeated again in Afghanistan, 50 years after they're defeated in Vietnam. I mean, they could claim, well, we lost Vietnam, but we won the Cold War. Yay! You know, the only battle that counts in war is the last one, and we won the Cold War. Now they've been defeated in Afghanistan. Ooh. What are they going to do? When a country engages in a prestige foreign policy, it usually does something to try to demonstrate to the world that it's still on top. And that was the source of that question to you. Would the Americans maybe recognize Taiwan as a way to engage in a compensatory response, whereby they would try to reestablish their leadership by showing that, again, we're standing up for democracy by recognizing Taiwan with free democratic elections against totalitarian China with its totalitarian communist party that does such bad things. And I want to go to the 4th group and ask them what they think here. The 4th group is Tiemann. Tiemann, what did your group decide?
Well, I think it was a little bit similar to the others. First of all, we didn't really think that the defeat of Afghanistan didn't have a lot to do with the Taiwanese policy. But then when you explained it was more about the nationalism, about that US now accrued a loss and that they would have to make up with it for a win. We didn't discuss it, but I do believe that they would maybe do it. Indeed, I think it is a sensible choice to first let a few other countries, first take the lead,
Okay.
Commanding them to do it first, like Lithuania is doing, to be puppets for the US itself.
Of course, yeah, go ahead.
Or in other matters, we have also seen that the US was the first to take a step. For example, Trump was the first, made America the first country to actually have the embassy of Israel in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that also shows that they also do take initiative. But I think maybe here there's a more competitive side with China, and if they still want to stay on good terms with China, maybe first let a few other countries do the same, as you said.
Yeah.
And then also follow.
The Democratic Party under Biden wants to be more multilateral, more globalist in orientation. So they would want to present a unified front of democratic countries. Trump was opposed to global multilateralism. America first, just do what we want to do. But Joe Biden is going to be more globally oriented because the Democratic Party has more of those elements in it. So yeah, I mean, you could say maybe that might be one way to understand what would happen with having Lithuania do the dirty job of recognizing Taiwan as a way by saying, well, it's all of the democratic community is recognizing another democracy against totalitarian China. Trump he wouldn't care so much about that. So that,
Yeah.
I mean, these are all speculations. But
Joe Biden is like continuing a little bit the path of Obama, in my opinion.
mhm.
He's trying to solve everything with diplomacy, whereas Trump tried to solve things with power and said,
Yeah.
we are the most powerful country in the world. We will do this like
Yeah,
that.
so-
and I think,
Yeah, I think this highlights, because this is our short class and time's up. And I wanted to show you there was some discussion. This is again opinion. Paul Atkinson is a writer for a right-wing pro-Trump website saying that Joe Biden is not demonstrating the will and determination that he needs to do to oppose the Taliban. And Jimmy Carter tried to do what Joe Biden has done in terms of withdrawing from South Korea, and Jimmy Carter was stopped from the opposition opposed Jimmy Carter's plan to take out the American military from South Korea because of the poor human rights conditions of under Park Chung-hee in South Korea, and there were protests and demonstrations and opposition that stopped him. And of course, again, the context for all of this is that Jimmy Carter was a fool, and because we won the Cold War eventually, even though America worked with Park Chung-hee, who was not a nice guy. He did a lot of bad things to his people, and Joe Biden was able to withdraw, but Joe Biden may be more dangerous than Jimmy Carter was, because there wasn't the opposition to Joe Biden the way there was sufficient opposition to Jimmy Carter's plan to take out the American military from South Korea. And but he emphasized, he's close it, but time will tell if Biden's refusal to compromise on this Afghan pullout, to not leave, will be proved correct. But with a potential confrontation looming with China over the fate of Taiwan, the question of America's patience with decades-old commitments is definitely on the table. Does America look weak? Does America no longer demonstrate the will and determination that will allow Beijing to believe that America is degenerate and weak? Remember the degenerate stereotype? Again, this Cold War legacy is so important for understanding even today how the people like this person and others understand the world. And that China, of course, is belligerent because it's an aggressive power. And now we're going to see whether or not China will move against Taiwan. So that's where we have to stop today. And anybody have any questions? And now that we'll get the class organized starting next week, okay? All right.
yes, thank you.
Just to conclude, because I came up with all these great little, let me see. So just to conclude on that note, we go to Cyber Campus. Please vote on whether or not you think, oh, time's up. Can't vote. Edit. Let me change this to, okay, save. So please vote on whether or not you think the United States is more likely to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign independent state.
I actually have a question. The PowerPoints you're showing us during the classes, are we able to look at them separately?
Yeah, I will put them on Cyber Campus. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I guess we should stop there. All right, so I will talk to you next week. I will find out, by the way, if we're going to meet face to face. The Korean government will tell us on Sunday whether or not we're able to go back to hybrid, but we'll see. Not until Sunday.
And
All right.
will we get an announcement regarding
I will
the
make
assignment for
sure.
Friday?
I will try to make sure. Yeah, I will. I've been making inquiries.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye-bye.